was your first audience before this stand-up moment?
Well, I tried to tell jokes in my school, and we were, no, it was not a wealthy place where I grew up, and the school.
You mean your childhood and your family?
My childhood was fine. We had everything we needed, but I'm saying the schools were were poor, and we didn't have we had no. There was no extracurricular things. They had no drama.
Okay.
The only thing we had was a music program.
Okay.
And but we didn't have like uniforms for band and things like that. We didn't really get it wasn't great. It was just a normal childhood where the school district was kind of going down, and so so instead of having dramas, because we didn't have a theater, we had a cafeteria.
Okay.
They had a talent show. And so I said, well, I signed up for that, and then I told jokes, and that was fantastic because I told jokes and I murdered there, and I went like, okay,
and
this is good.
Did you win?
Yeah, it was a talent show, so it was not really a contest,
okay.
But it was just a show, and then so you get laughs.
But people love you.
Yeah, so that was like, hey, this felt pretty good, but it's different though.
What did you feel in that moment when you hear everybody laughing?
Well, it made you feel like. This is more fun than working at the gas station. And it was an angry time in America because there was a gas shortage. So all the cars were waiting, and they could only get so many gallons. It was under the Carter administration, so President Carter. So there wasn't, you couldn't get all the gas, So people were waiting.
Okay.
And in line, and they were angry, and this is before you couldn't self-serve. You had to be the guy to do that, And then it was odd and even license plate, and so people were angry, and then so it wasn't fun. But then I would go to the comedy clubs and try to avoid, and we're like, I don't want to do this,
All that employees help you to make the characters that we have been watching at the movies, because you have been doing a lot of characters, different characters in the movies.
Well, it's fun because you get, San Francisco was fun because you get to see different nationalities, because on my dad's side were the Jews, my mom's were Filipinos, but then we had Koreans, which were really tough and really hard working people. The Korean, people that I knew had their relatives move in from South Korea, and they stayed for 10 years. They wouldn't come for the weekend. They didn't come for 2 weeks. They stayed and lived with them for 10 years until they opened up their own Kentucky Fried Chicken or dry cleaner or whatever. So he's like, wow, that's a different experience,
Yeah.
And we had a lot of Filipinos moving in to our house because my mom's from the Philippines, and so we try to help other families. So they would come stay with us and then move out. They wouldn't stay for 10 years, but they would come in and it was great because they were all lovely people.
Yeah.
They're coming in, and they come in like my aunt, when I was 8 or 9 years old, she came and lived and stayed in my room. We had a twin bed. She's staying in the bed with me. And
No way.
I had somebody to talk to all night. It was great.
How long?
She was there for maybe a month.
Wow.
She was so sweet because she cooked. Tita Rose. She was the most beautiful.
Tita?
Yeah. When you call her, she says on the phone, beautiful. She said, "What can I do for you, my dear?" Isn't that beautiful? But as opposed to my mother, "What? Who is this? What do you want, Robert?" That kind of, it's different. So it's a yin and yang.
Wow.
She's the yang, my mom was the yang. But it was very lovely, and and so then you had like the Chinese too, because at my gas station was the gas station I worked was John Chang and Patrick Chow. So and he thought he was it's Hong Kong different because it's not Mandarin. Okay. It's so it's different. It's more sing song, and like Gao means rope, but Gao means dick. So you have so it's the same word. So I would talk to them, and Zhang Chao, he talk, Yamo Gao Cho, and then you learn Chinese. I learned a little bit of Chinese, and then there's this Korean, which is a little different, and then Japanese, like this, very strong. And did you hear this? And so I was always fascinated because it was right there.
Wow.
Japantown, Filipinos, Koreans,
Yes, so many mixes.
And then there's Russians, and Russian people, when they're talking, they're like, Russians make you feel terrible when they say hello. Good morning. You're like, good morning, Rob. you know, and so it was nice to see that culture and to be open to it. And there was the Mexicans too. We had of course, in the Mission District, where the Mexicanos were doing all the work everywhere, of course, you know, and so that was an incredible experience.
Yeah, and you're talking about your mother. Is it real that your mother was on the Second World War?
Yes.
Versus Japan.
Well, she was a little girl during World War II, and she grew up without a father, but she, you know, she had a lot of relatives, which is important. She thought she had. When she didn't meet her mother until she was 3 because her mother had smallpox. Blah, blah, blah. So she had a very complicated, very difficult life. But she describes her time during the war when the Japanese were, you know, temporarily conquered the Philippines. And they always call themselves, whenever you conquer a place, whether the United States or whatever, or España, whatever, we're liberating you. And so the Japanese, we're liberating you from the Americans. But she considered that the most exciting time in her life.
Okay.
She wasn't depressed about it or sad by it, you know. So it was really amazing because I would ask her to tell stories, you know, and she said, I was going to trade, and she would have to create ways to get money. Okay. And it's a very cased system, you know. What they had to do was to figure out a way to survive and get food.
Yeah.
So, but she would go and trade for food. The camote was the thing. You can live on camotes, and they did.
Wow.
So she told the stories about, she would take the bed sheets, they were all worn bed sheets and soft bed sheets, and they would make payamas out of them, and then sew little flowers on them with her mother and her sisters. And then they would take those and they would go and trade them for camote. To eat. And then on the way back, she said one time she was with you know, her cousins. On the way back, this Japanese soldier stopped them. And you know, they had literally the baskets on the head, which is actually, she said, you know, it's a good way to carry the stuff. You know, it's basically on your shoulders and your head. And this Japanese soldier took the biggest one. And one of my favorite stories I heard, she took the biggest one, and she started yelling at him in Japanese, I went for 2 days to get that, my mother, I'm bringing the biggest one, and you take the biggest one. And he's yelling at this Jap, who could have easily killed her, you know. And so the officer came out of the, you know, because it was a patrol, came out and said, what's happening here? And he said, I went for 2 days there at the end of camote for my mother, and he took them, you know, in Japanese, because she spoke a little Japanese. And he just looked at her, took the camote and gave it back to her. And everybody else was scared, like, you know, you could have gotten killed. But for her, I don't think she said to me, I was never scared. So it was fascinating, you know.
What did you learn from her? Survival,
and not to have fear. She was never afraid. And so I think it's important, and to know that I came from that. It was like, if you want to do something, just do it, and don't worry about it. Don't be afraid. You can't go into anything with fear. That's it. You know, I mean, I would have preferred to have, you know, my Tita Rose. Like, oh, Rob, what can I do for you? I was like, no, you're gonna, you know. So it was a little tougher. Okay. But you learn from that. I mean, that's why I feel like I should have been in therapy when I started my career and not been making movies. I needed therapy, you know, which I still do, and I'm doing it. But at the same time, you forgive, you know. You have to, like, their experience is their experience. But I realized something, Yordi, that like my mother was like a 12-year-old girl. My sister told me this. She said, "Do you realize we were raised by a 12-year-old girl, right? That's where she was. That's where like all the stuff happened with the Japanese and all that stuff. So that's where she was. When she has conflicts, you get to that 12-year-old girl, and that's like when you realize that, you go, my goodness, that makes sense. And then you also have empathy for that, you know, and then you also realize that was horrible. But it just is what it is. So you try to make sure the next generation of kids, it's more kinder and gentler. And luckily, I have a beautiful, wonderful person to raise my kids with, Patricia, who's a wonderful mother and a great example, and is constantly learning. And so the kids really do benefit from that, and it's beautiful. I'm loving it.
Wow. So right now you know that a Mexican woman doesn't get angry and doesn't make problems.
I didn't mean to laugh hard, but
just because Mexican girls are that way.
No, but she's very, very direct and calm, but that's scarier.
Okay.
No. Because
Yes.
I don't like a silence, or I don't like, so I have to read it differently. Because I'm used to getting yelled at. But when you don't get yelled at and you have to figure out how angry is she really, because you don't know. She's very calm and exact, which is I like it, but at the same time, I prefer getting yelled at because I know, hey, you know how to deal with it. All right. But it really does help if two people are raising kids. They're both adults,
Yeah.
and you put the kids first, and it's just nice to be, but it's happening so fast. I mean, we see the movie last night, and you see our little girl. Now she's it's over.
Yes.
It's over. She's no longer the 8-year-old.
Oh, yes.
Her teeth have changed. We had to reshoot one scene, just to, for the movie, and she changed already. Her voice changed.
Wow.
So we had to be back a little bit further, and now it's a year and a half. So it's just in that way it's beautiful. We'll always have her as an 8-year-old in this movie.
Wow.